And let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word and pray as we look at it together this morning. You'll speak to us from it. Give us eyes to see and ears to truly hear from you. Amen. I think it's fair to say this, isn't it, that in life misunderstandings are common. They are something that happens all the time. They're something that happens every day. Sometimes it's a question of language. That is, someone says something, we don't really quite understand what they've said, or we weren't expecting them to say it like that, or we weren't exactly sure what they did say, and therefore there's some sort of confusion. Maybe it's to do with hearing, quite hear what somebody says, and you sort of, as you do sometimes when you don't quite hear what someone says, you kind of guess, and the guess is a bit wrong. Maybe we just don't understand what people are talking about sometimes. Of course, most misunderstandings in life are insignificant and easily resolved. You sort of carry on the conversation and you realize that you were talking about the wrong person. It's all very funny and everybody has a good laugh and it's all good. Of course, some understandings take a little bit longer to resolve, but don't matter. That's kind of sitcom territory, isn't it? I think most British sitcoms are built on a misunderstanding in the first minute, which then spans out for the rest of the 30 minutes of the episode and may or may not be resolved at the end. I don't think I've revealed anything massively significant about the plot of most sitcoms written in the 80s there, but that's just generally how it works. Or farces work that way, don't they? There's some kind of misunderstanding, and everybody is got the wrong end of the stick. There we are. We even have expressions in English to express the reality that we can easily misunderstand one another. As I say, most of those misunderstandings, they really don't matter very much, and you can resolve them by working out what is and what isn't. So what is true, what isn't true? Who are you talking about? Who are you not talking about? And resolving a misunderstanding usually involves both, doesn't it? Usually involves, well, I am saying this, but I'm not saying that. Misunderstandings. Of course, sometimes misunderstandings can be a little bit more important than that. Sometimes the misunderstanding runs deeper. We might feel that some of the things that we see in our world that aren't quite the way they ought to be are based on misunderstandings. Often a little bit more to it than that, but certainly misunderstanding can be a part of it. Misunderstandings can get very deep-seated, can't they? They can become enshrined. That is, understanding things in a particular way, which is actually a misunderstanding, becomes the way we have to understand things. And I think particularly when a misunderstanding is enshrined, then people become really keen to defend it. And it can take a while to sort out. I'll give you one example from history. Think about the Reformation. There was the Reformation was about, at one level, very simple things. It was about a misunderstanding of the way in which grace worked. The medieval church talked about grace in a particular way. The Reformers demonstrated that wasn't really how the Scriptures talked about grace. And you'd think that would be reasonably straightforward to resolve, but it wasn't, because everything got bound up with everything else, and it was all enshrined in papal authority. So this wasn't about whether or not the Bible said this. This is about whether the Pope, who decided that he was the one who could interpret the Bible above all others, that he would be able to say this and that and the other. And let's just say it took a while to unpick it all. It's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? Some people sometimes ask, well, hang on, why such a fuss about something so small? Well, because that's often how misunderstandings work. And people get enshrined. They get enshrined, and people get stubborn, and people won't change their minds. That's misunderstanding, isn't it? Not quite understanding it, and then saying, well, yeah, I don't want to correct it. I want to keep going down the path I'm going down. We're thinking about misunderstandings today. Why are we thinking about misunderstandings? Well, because there are lots of misunderstandings in this passage. Again and again and again, people misunderstand. They misunderstand themselves, and they misunderstand God. But at the heart of this passage, there is good news. So as we come to 2 Kings 5, we come to this dual reality. We come to, this is basically a passage which is good news, but there are misunderstandings. So what I want us to do is to think about that good news and to think about the misunderstandings and to do those two things that we need to do to resolve a misunderstanding, which is to say, well, what is it and what isn't it? What is the good news and what is the good news not? So let's look at that together, shall we? Come with me to 2 Kings chapter 5. We'll look at the first 19 verses first of all. And the good news is for all who trust God. What it is, what it isn't. The good news is for all who trust God. Let's trace through the story. That should say verse 1. 2 Kings 5:1. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now, the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. Now, at this point, you might say, whoa, hang on, what's going on here? You've just introduced all these new people to me, okay? This narrative moves very quickly for the first 7 verses, then slows down. Don't worry. But let's just remind ourselves of where we're up to. A little bit of context. The king of Syria, or the king of Aram, Syria borders Israel to the northeast, okay? Not Assyria, that's somebody different. That's the other side of Syria, okay? But Syria is kind of in competition with Israel. Throughout Ahab's reign, if you remember reading about that in 1 Kings, the Syrians were the people there that were usually fighting, and it's been a mixture of at war and at peace. The peace when it comes is always fragile, and the peace when it comes isn't total. So what seems to be being described in verse 2 is a border raid. It's not a full-out war, but the Syrians were raiding, and they captured some people, including a young girl. So that's one piece of context. Then the other piece of context is Naaman, okay? Naaman, who is highly honored in the narrative. And that's interesting because Naaman is not an Israelite, he's a Syrian. But he is spoken of well. He is commander of the army. He was a great man and in high favor. And notice the most critical thing is that Nahum was the vehicle through which the Lord had given victory to Syria. Which reminds us, of course, that the Lord is sovereign over all things and over all nations, but reminds us also that God's plans and purposes aren't always straightforward for us to work out. But Nahum has a problem. He has what's described here as leprosy. Now, we know that the scriptures use the word leprosy for a whole range of skin diseases. Given that Naaman is allowed to be sort of part of normal society, this does not appear to be a contagious disease like leprosy or what we would call today Hansen's disease is. Okay? This is some kind of skin disease. We don't know exactly what, but clearly something which was serious enough to be something that everybody knew about Naaman. Oh, you know Naaman, he's the one who's got leprosy. So that's Naaman. And then there's this little girl who's captured on this border raid. And the girl then reveals her character in verse 3. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." Here is a little girl maybe, or possibly a girl approaching marriageable age, so sort of early teenager. Then this girl has been captured and presumably separated from her family during a raid, but this girl knows that God's sovereign, and this girl knows that the Lord is in charge, and this girl knows that God's prophet will be able to heal Naaman. It's a little vignette, isn't it? We don't hear much about this girl from this point, but do you notice it? Here is faith and trust in God in the midst of challenging circumstances. She's effectively a slave or a maidservant. She's got a mistress because she's been captured, but she still is prepared to act in the interests of her master, who is the one who has captured her. And this trust in the little girl is the window which opens up hope for Naaman. And so the narrative moves on again really swiftly. We do actually get to verse 5 now. And the king of Syria said, Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive? That this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy. Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." As I say, the narrative moves swiftly. and quite a lot of stuff is missed out. This escalates very quickly from the little girl to Naaman to the king sending Naaman with a letter to Israel saying, I want you to cure him, king. This is international diplomacy. The king of Syria seems to assume that the prophet will be at the king's court. Of course he will. And that the king will be the one who will be in charge of the prophet, because that's what would happen in Syria. Jehoram, by the way, is still the king here. And Jehoram's response is the response that we saw back in 2 Kings chapter 3, when faced with any kind of adversity. He becomes very quickly hopeless. See the question he asks, am I God? Here is a man whose character is marked by fear and despair. Anytime a difficult situation comes along, he assumes that everybody is out to get him. He thought that God was out to get him in 2 Kings 3. He now thinks that the Syrians are out to get him in 2 Kings chapter 5. Misunderstandings. The king of Aram or Syria misunderstands and thinks the king of Israel is more powerful than he is, that he commands the prophet. The king of Israel doesn't. The king of Israel, well, his misunderstanding is greater, isn't he? He misunderstands who he is, and he misunderstands who God is. He says, am I God? Well, no, you're not, but God is. Here is a man who lives without hope. He completely contrasts in character, doesn't he, with the little girl we've just met. She, in the midst of genuinely difficult circumstances in Syria, continued to trust God. The king, sitting in his palace in Samaria, doesn't trust God. So we take a breath, because it's been quite pacey till the end of verse 7, hasn't it? But don't worry, it's all going to slow down and get a bit calmer, because now Elisha enters. Verse 8, but when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. One of the things this passage does is it reinforces the fact that as the prophet of God, as the one who speaks from God, the prophet is not at the king's beck and call. He comes and goes as he pleases. Now he comes and offers to see Naaman. See what this is about as far as Elijah is concerned. This is about the fact that there is a prophet in Israel, which means that God speaks and acts. Elisha, as we'll see as we go through the narrative, isn't interested primarily in that he is recognized. He is interested most of all in that God is recognized as the one who has power over life and death, because God is the one who speaks and acts through his prophet. Okay, so we start moving towards resolution. Well, it looks like we are. Look at verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. So what happens here? Naaman comes and stands outside. Why does he stand outside? He stands outside because he is expecting Elisha to come out to him. Okay? Naaman is there with his horses and chariots. He has his full retinue. All his hangers-on are there, because Naaman, we know, is a very important person. Very important person. The commander of the king's army. And so he goes to the prophet's house and waits, presuming that the prophet will come out to him to do what needs to be done. That is not what happens. The prophet does not come out. The prophet sends his servant out with a set of instructions that Naaman is to do. That is, the prophet doesn't come out to do stuff. His messenger comes out to tell Naaman to do stuff. Hence, verse 11, but Naaman was angry and went away, saying, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. He's angry because he's not been treated with respect. Why did the prophet not come out to me? I'm an important person. He's angry because, frankly, the Jordan is not a very impressive river. And if you're going to cleanse someone of leprosy, then you ought to do it in something a bit more splendid, okay? The Jordan is, for most of its length, not a very impressive river, to be honest. It's generally quite shallow and muddy. There are better, quote-unquote, rivers elsewhere. If you go towards Mesopotamia, land of the rivers, then you'll get better rivers. So, to an extent, it kind of has a point. But I think also at the heart of this is this. He says, I thought the prophet would come out and wave his hands about. I was looking for a show, to be honest. He wants a miracle that comes with all the things that miracles are supposed to come with. He wants the manual acts. Otherwise, it's not really a proper miracle, is it? This is all about how Naaman's expectations are overturned when he comes face to face with the prophet and with God. He misunderstands who he is, he misunderstands who Elisha is, and he misunderstands who God is. It's not terribly promising. However, thankfully, verse 13, but his servants came near and said to him, my father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? He has actually said to you, wash and be clean. So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Once again in this narrative, it's the servants who know best. We've seen that a few times already. It was a servant back in chapter 2 who knew where Elisha was. It's the servant who knows how Naaman can be healed. It is the servant who advised Naaman how to act rightly. There was something very subversive going on through all these texts about who knows and who doesn't. The servants know best. And Naaman essentially comes to a place of humility, doesn't he? He accepts the word from the prophet. He moves from that place of arrogance to that place of humble acceptance. And of course, he is restored and healed. And we are told that this miracle happens, this incurable skin disease is cured. But we're told that very simply, aren't we? Because that isn't actually the main focus of the narrative. The main focus of the narrative is not on the physical healing. In a sense, we've seen Elisha at work enough times now not to be surprised that Elisha can heal people. I mean, Elisha raised the dead last week, so a little bit of skin disease is not even the same category, is it? What happens next is key. Look at verse 15. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him, and he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Notice that Naaman now comes to stand before Elisha. He does not wait for Elisha to come and stand before him. He is humble. He knows that he's received from God, that there's a great statement of the truth about God. Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. This is a significant statement in a world where everybody thought there were lots of different gods, who were essentially territorial. That yes, God could be the God of Israel, but when you went across to Syria, you needed different gods. Or when you went into Egypt, you needed different gods. Or you went across to Greece, you needed different gods. This statement is a statement that there is one God, and that God is sovereign over all things. He is the God of all the earth, not just a local God. And Naaman offers a gift. Now, this gift is not an attempt to buy favor. The favor has already been received. It is a response. It's a present. It is exactly what it says it is. The gift is refused, but there is good grace on both sides. And Naaman stays as the supplicant. He makes another request. He asks, verse 17, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. In this matter may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. He said to him, go in peace. Right, there's 2 parts to Naaman's request. The first is for some land. Why? Well, because he wants to offer a sacrifice to God on land that is part of Israel. Now, is that necessary, strictly necessary? No. Later on, when we come to Daniel, who is very keen to make sure that he prays to God appropriately, he doesn't seem to worry about that. What is this? This is a piece of accommodation. There is no problem with a couple of barrel loads of Israel going with Naaman, and if that will help Naaman, fine. Okay? What about the second? Is the second request to be syncretistic, to say, well, I'm going to worship God, but I need to be able to worship Rimmon as well? No, I don't think it is. I think reading the request, it is a recognition that Naaman has responsibilities. That one of his responsibilities is to go with his Lord and Master into the temple of Rimmon, and that when his Lord and Master bows, and he's supporting himself on Naaman, it's going to be tricky for Naaman not to bow as well. Think about the mechanics of that. I think that is what this request is. It doesn't make sense in the statement, in the light of the statement that he's just made, for him to be saying, well, can I still worship God? He's saying, I still need to be able to accompany my Lord, because he's my Lord, when he goes into the temple of Rimmon. That's the request. Okay? And when you put the request like that, maybe many of us here start to chime in to understand that kind of request. It's the complexities of negotiating an environment where you're worshiping God, but most other people aren't. And it's an environment many of us face day by day, isn't it? That we exist in an environment where we have to work with and operate in environments which are not Christian. Sometimes they're anti-Christian, sometimes they're just try and be secular, whatever that means. And we have to work out what that looks like. How we dress at work, whether we wear a cross or not, whether we feel we should. All those little decisions that we have to make, we make them in the midst of a complex environment. That's the same here. You see, for most of the Old Testament, we're dealing with Israel in Israel, and therefore we're dealing with how you live as God's people amongst God's people. With Naaman, we're dealing with how do you live as God's people when everybody else isn't. And so it's about working out what that looks like, the complexities of negotiating a pagan or, for us, a non-Christian environment. And what matters most of all is the heart attitude. Naaman's heart turns to devotion to the Lord. Okay? He trusts God. That statement is deliberately placed there, that the Lord he recognizes as sovereign, and therefore he is concerned that he doesn't act in a way which dishonors God. Which is why Elisha says to him, go in peace. As in, yeah, that's fine. So, the good news is for all who trust God. What do we have here amongst all the misunderstandings? Well, notice what we have. We have a display of trust, we have a display of humility, and we have a display of hope. But we have that display of trust, humility, and hope in the midst of fear and arrogance and despair. And that's what's going on. That's what the misunderstanding is about. Okay? So let's take those in turn. First of all, hope. Hope is central to this passage, and the hope is that the good news is for all Jew and Gentile. We had that passage from Luke chapter 4. We'll come back to it in a few minutes, but one of the things that passage in Luke chapter 4 indicates is that Elijah and Elisha were both deliberately sent by God to minister to people outside the people of Israel. One of the things that Jesus is doing when he flags that is to flag the fact that that is what his ministry will lead to, that the hope will come not just to those in Israel, to those outside. Naaman is a Syrian, and he stays a Syrian. Do you notice that? He goes back. Previously, very often, you get people who join in, people like Ruth, people like Rahab. They become part of the people of God. That's not an option for Naaman. But nevertheless, he trusts God. So there is this hope. There is the hope of the physical healing, but more importantly, the hope of spiritual healing. This is the hope for the nations. Don't let anyone tell you that the Old Testament is only interested in God's people in Israel. It's clearly not the case. Elijah and Elisha's ministry both involves going outside Israel, whether physically or metaphorically, and the gospel, the good news, healing, hope, going out beyond those boundaries. So we have hope rather than despair. At the heart of this passage is the question of trust. Do you trust God? The little girl trusts God, but the king doesn't. Naaman comes to trust God. Elisha trusts God. We'll see as we go through the others in this narrative who don't. That's the question the narrative asks. The good news is for all who trust God. And it's good news if you do trust God. And then humility. There is a humility required to receive the gift of grace. Now that was true for Naaman. Naaman had to realize that the instruction that the prophet gave him, even if it didn't come in the package he was hoping for, was nevertheless the grace of God, the gift of God to him, to go and wash and be healed. We have to recognize, don't we, that the gift of grace that we receive in Jesus Christ doesn't necessarily come with spectacular trappings. And it's certainly not something that we can earn, and certainly doesn't come to us because of how great we are. There is a humility required of us, isn't there, in terms of receiving. Trusting God requires a humility. It requires us to be able to say, not my will, Lord, but yours. It requires us to say, I don't know what's going on, but that's okay. That's a difficult thing to say. Well, it's an easy thing to say, isn't it? Most things are easy to say. It's a difficult thing to live by. I don't know what's going on, but that's okay. Tried that? It's hard work. There's a humility required in all this. The misunderstanding to think that this is about fear, arrogance, and despair. This is about hope and trust and humility. The good news is for all who trust God. That was true in 2 Kings 5, and it's true today. That's what the good news is. More briefly, what is the good news not? Well, the good news is not for selfish gain. Look on. Let's keep going with this narrative. Again, we're going reasonably slowly. Verse 19. But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, see, my master has spared this Naaman the Syrian in not accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. Now, Gehazi, if the name is familiar to you, we met him last week, okay? He was Elisha's servant. Was he helpful? Was he unhelpful? We said we'd find out more about him this week. This is this week, so we're finding more about him. His thoughts are revealed to us, okay? He is driven by a desire for personal gain. Also notice, this Syrian, not this fellow believer, this Syrian, one of them, one of the other. I told you one of the things that was going on in Luke 4 was that Jesus was reminding his audience that the gospel was for all the nations. What's the other thing that's going on in Luke 4? Well, it's their attempt to kill Jesus. Why? Because he's told them that the good news is not just going to be for Israel, it's going to be for those outside Israel. In fact, even that in Elisha's and Elijah's ministry, God chose to send them to people outside Israel rather than people inside Israel. That's why they try and stone him in Luke chapter 4. Because it's offensive to suggest that the good news is going to go to the wrong people. That it isn't just for us and for our benefit, but that actually it might go elsewhere. Gehazi fully signs up to the idea that once a Syrian, always a Syrian. Verse 21, so Gehazi followed Naaman. And when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from his chariot to meet him and said, is all well? And he said, all is well. My master has sent me to say, they have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim, 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. Now, if you were with us last week, you will know that phrase, all is well, or is all well, carries with it a bit of baggage. It was the interchange between the Shunammite woman and Elisha. And when we were told all was well, all was not well. I think the choice of the phrase is deliberate, okay? It's an echo from that previous passage. And it reminds us that what's being said here isn't the truth. We know that, don't we? Okay? Gehazi is being dishonest here. Is all well? Oh, yeah, all is well. No, it's not. Because it's not well with Gehazi, if nothing else. So he says, oh, look, some people have just turned up. Can we have some stuff for them? It's a lie. It's a flat-out lie. But Naaman is gracious. Verse 23. Be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 chains of clothing and laid them on 2 of his servants. And they carried him before Gehazi. Nothing wrong with what Naaman does here. He He honours the request. The problem is with Gehazi. And we see more of why it's a problem in verse 24. And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in his house, and he sent the men away, and they departed. The hill here may well be kind of the citadel. So when he comes back to Samaria, to the sort of palace complex, if you like, he goes to his house, because he's an important servant of Elisha, and he hides the stuff. Okay? Just in case we were in any doubt about Gehazi's dishonesty. Verse 25. He went in and stood before his master. And Elisha said to him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" And he said, "Your servant went nowhere." But he said to him, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever." So he went out from his presence a leper like snow. God, of course, knows, and God reveals to his prophet what's been going on. Why is it not the time to receive all these gifts? There are times when gifts are perfectly reasonable to be received. I think for this reason, because to receive gifts at this time would be to undermine the importance of the free offer of salvation and restoration. Salvation is not bought and sold. Salvation is a free gift. That is why, presumably, Elisha refuses the gift, and why Gehazi was not at liberty to go and chase after one. Gehazi gets what he deserves. Do you notice that? He becomes like the gentle Naaman was because he behaves like a Gentile. Arrogance and lack of trust. It's a strong warning, isn't it, about not treating the good news for selfish gain. It's the danger of misunderstanding again, isn't it? The danger of misunderstanding the power of the good news. That because the good news is so significant, because the good news is so good, because the good news is a matter of life and death, and we know that it is, that it's therefore an opportunity to profit. We can understand that world. We live in that world, don't we? If you have something good, then you market it and make some money from it. If you've got a good idea, you don't give it away for free, you sell it. Well, if you've got the good news of life and death, surely that can be, to use the modern language, monetized. So we understand what's going on here. It's a constant tension through history that here is the good news of Jesus Christ, this amazing news, this transformative news that is preached and goes out with God's people to the world. But where does the money come in? And how does the money fit in? Because the money's needed, isn't it? Because you do need money to do this. We come straight away to one of the issues with the good news, one of the issues of misunderstanding that comes with the good news, which has been with us for 2,000 years and will be with us for the next 2,000 years or until the Lord returns. It is money. What is the connection between supporting the ministry and receiving the gift of the ministry? Think about the prosperity gospel. You've heard of the prosperity gospel? This is in its rawest form, the idea of a minister who will essentially say to you, look, if you want to receive the benefits of the gospel, then you need to send me money. Now, the prosperity gospel has more subtle forms, but that is it is most darkest. It's most transparent. That to receive the gifts of God, you must give financially. Obviously, often, it's a lot more subtle than that. Or what about the conversations I have, and maybe others have had, with folk in churches, not this church actually, but in churches where they desperately want people to come in. They definitely want people to come in. They really want people to come into church. Because the roof needs repairing. And because there isn't enough money. And because if more people come, then more people could give. Now listen, you know, I'm always happy to talk about giving. I've got no problem with the fact that as Christians, part of our discipleship is that we should be generous. Okay? But part of our discipleship is that we should be generous in response to what we've received, not that we should pay for that which we have not yet received. It's a basic narrative. It's a basic pattern of how the gospel works. The gospel is always a free gift. No one should be charged to hear the good news. There should be no impediment to hearing the good news. Everyone should have access to it. Once we've responded to it, fine, we talk about discipleship, and that, of course, includes money. But we can't be trying to get people into church so that they can give. We're getting people into church, I agree with that, so that they can hear the good news of Jesus Christ and come and trust in him. So there's issues around money here, and of course, if there's ever any issues around money, there's also issues around power. Money and power very often go together. Who gets to decide who gets to hear the gospel? You'd think that's a stupid question, wouldn't you? Because obviously everybody gets to hear the gospel. Well, yes, except that that's not always been the case, has it? Sometimes the church has been very restrictive about who gets to hear the gospel based on various different ways of restricting it down the years, whether that's restriction based on language, whether that's a restriction based on color, whether that's a restriction based on race, so on and so forth. You see, this isn't just about Gehazi taking a bit of cash, is it? This is about a big issue that we need to resolve around what the good news isn't. The good news is not for selfish gain. The good news is the free gift of salvation, which must be offered to everybody and is for everybody. We mustn't misunderstand that. We must do two things. We must receive the free offer of the gospel. The offensive free offer of the gospel sometimes, it requires us to come humbly and to say, I need to receive what the Lord is offering me. I cannot bring a gift. I cannot pay for it. I cannot earn it. I cannot deserve it, but I can receive it as a free gift. And then we need to offer the free gift of the gospel as widely as possible. The free gift of Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word, and we pray that as we reflect on it, as we continue to hear it, that you would help us to understand the good news of Jesus Christ, what it is and what it isn't. Amen.